floor for questions. Any questions from the audience? Yes. Please introduce yourself and.
So my name is Ravi Rajgopalan, and what is relevant here is that I am an entrepreneur. Can you hear me? Right. So my name is Ravi Rajgopalan. I'm not an economist, but I'm an entrepreneur. I returned from the UK 10 years ago to set up an Indian product company, okay, which gets very little government support, but that's not the point. So this has been an engrossing discussion, and everybody's viewpoints are more or less well known, and I have obviously read Mr. Mahajan's writings before on how we need to be more and more indigenous. In my view, there are two things we export, we import. We import energy and we import capital. And I think that the mission of making us a $5 trillion economy has to first and foremost focus on creating domestic equity, which is economic equity.
Your question, please.
My question is that, do you believe as economists and people associated with government that in order to do this transformation, government needs to now start consciously stepping back from actually running portions of the economy, must provide a clear regulatory environment, a level playing field, predictable regulation, not manage things like the exchange rate, but just focus on private entrepreneurs like me, bringing capital in and making 10-year, 15-year, 20-year plans for employing people and creating capital?
Who is your question addressed to?
I think I would address this to Shamika. I mean, you're in a position of, some influence in the government and as member of the Economic Advisory Council. So could you please give me a response to that?
Shamika, I think the question is that the default response of any government as well as industry and even private citizens in India tends to be that the government must step in anytime there is an impending crisis, or not even crisis is a strong word, anytime there is a challenge, the dependence on government is too much. Government needs to withdraw more and more so that private enterprise can begin to expand and grow. That's your question.
No, I think in principle, everybody would agree with you. The issue is now you have to talk about details. For instance, even banks. It is true that our public sector banks do have NPA problems. By the way, so do private sector banks. In fact, today morning we've heard about shares of one particular one falling. Governance remains a problem. And of course, I consider the blunder of the 70s under Mrs. Gandhi of nationalizing. Now we have adequate evidence that this is not the way to do things. But at the same time, privatization of those banks being the obvious solution is also not very clear to me. Okay? And this is where I will bring in the judicial part of the story. We get after some of our worst performing public sector banks. And I will bulky speak about the Punjab National Bank just as an example. You know, their exposure to the energy sector was quite high. Power. Okay, their exposure to power was very high. Now you must ask, is Supreme Court's decision overnight has led to accumulation of the kind of NPAs? It is not just a governance or a management problem alone. It is the fact that we have had these kind of reversals that has led to some of this aggregation. So privatization as a simple solution is not very clear. Now we can get to ownership and management, and I think that is where the Nayak committee, it's important that we don't delegate it. It was a very important committee. Uske recommendations बहुत मायने रखते हैं. We should now go back and see कि management कैसे किया जाए. वो ownership, वो separation of management from ownership कैसे किया जाए. Or as the Prime Minister keeps saying, phone banking, दिल्ली से phone करना. वो तो बार-बार the PM keeps saying कि we need that kind of a separation. So I think in principle, everybody will agree. It is about now details. What should be the detail of which enterprise that you are talking about?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? I do not disagree with anything that you said. I think there are a lot of details involved. My question to you was about setting up some kind of a focus, right? Do you believe that there has to be a conscious focus from government going forward over the next 5 years, with the kind of mandate Mr. Modi has got in 2019, despite all the hiccups in the economy the previous 3-4 years. Do you think that there is a mandate for the government to consciously set itself a task to start withdrawing from running the economy, providing clear playing field, regulation, etc., to make sure that the focus of government is to provide for social equity, is to provide for political equity, and leave the creation of economic equity to the private sector? I'm not asking for privatizations. I'm not asking for bailouts. We live and die by the sword of capitalism. But unless you unleash those animal spirits, you're going to have the same panel discussion 5 years down the line.
I completely agree. I completely agree. I think there is, in fact, in this budget, you saw that there is now a department within the finance ministry completely delegated with this responsibility, which is divestment. So I think there is an acceptance in the government that government can no longer remain in the business that it has for the last so many years. So in some sense, replicating some of the big reforms that we saw under the Vajpayee era, where you had a cabinet ranked ministry for divestment. So I think in spirit, absolutely, and in action also it has been revealed that divestment is very much on the table. But we don't want to muddle that with the foreign, and that is a separate issue. Yeah.
Yes, please. I request people asking questions to please only ask the question and not make comments. Thank you.
I am Suresh Kumar. My question is, India stands 77th position in the ease of doing business. So what are the steps the government is going to make for the private investment to facilitate the private investment? Second question is, for the policy of China a certain period back is to devalue their currency for the private sector's export. So is the government should adopt a strategy for this kind of thinking also, so that our private sector will benefit?
Who is your question addressed to?
The panel.
Dr. Singh, would you like to take that question?
See, as far as the question of exchange rate is concerned, there is a clear case of what we saw in China. The Chinese economy, the Chinese authorities for nearly 10 years were underplaying their exchange, highly devalued exchange rate. Actually, the whole episode of 2003 to 2005, if you see the war of words which were taking place between the Congress in the US and China, was on their exchange rate manipulation. The foreign exchange reserves of the total $10 trillion foreign exchange reserves that were there in the world in 2010, 4 trillion were held by China. Just by manipulating their exchange rate, they had accumulated such huge amount of foreign exchange reserves, and now that they had accumulated these huge foreign exchange reserves, the Americans couldn't do anything except talk to them. So I do feel that on exchange rate, one has to tread the path very carefully. Can India do the same now? My feeling is we are in a different world. The situation is very different. The Trump administration looks at it in a very different way. I don't think there is anything that one can do much on the exchange rate. One has to follow a prudent exchange rate policy. As far as ease of doing business is concerned, yes, there have been numerous announcements. I just can't remember them off my... but yes, the government is making efforts. One of the key things that I look at it is they're providing and ensuring enough liquidity into the system and ensuring that the banks are aware of the situation, the latest what we have seen in the last 1 month, and addressing the issue that NBFCs are facing and providing liquidity up there. So to that extent, ensuring that there's enough liquidity flow for the business to take forward, I think is very important.